One wrong decision, one moment of overconfidence, and the whole world changes forever. Today we'll talk about 5 rulers whose catastrophic mistakes changed the course of history. Let's go. On June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler made what was perhaps the most fateful mistake in military history. He attacked the Soviet Union, opening a second front before the war in Europe was over. What went wrong? Hitler was confident that the USSR would fall in 6 weeks. He ignored the advice of his generals, underestimated the size of the country, and forgot about the Russian winter. The result? 27 million Soviet citizens died, Nazi Germany was completely defeated, and the Third Reich came to an end. The war, which was supposed to last a month and a half, turned into a 4-year nightmare that cost Germany everything. Key phrase: never fight Russia in winter, ask Napoleon. Oh, wait. After the death of the great unifier of China, Qin Shi Huang, in 210 BC, his son Ershi came to power. And then it began. Instead of ruling the empire, the young emperor threw orgies, executed loyal ministers on suspicion, and doubled taxes to build his own palaces. At the same time, the people were dying of hunger after his father's large-scale construction projects. The result? The Qin dynasty, which took centuries to build, collapsed just 3 years after the death of its founder. Ershi was forced to commit suicide when rebels laid siege to the capital. The record for destroying the legacy of one's ancestors. January 1905. Thousands of workers peacefully marched to the Winter Palace with a petition to the Tsar. They demand basic rights and improved working conditions. The response? A massacre. Hundreds die on Bloody Sunday. Nicholas II had dozens of opportunities to implement reforms and avoid disaster. He had advisors who begged him to modernize the country, but the emperor believed in the divine right to power and considered any concessions to be a sign of weakness. It only got worse. A disastrous entry into World War I, the influence of Rasputin, famine, economic collapse. The result? In 1917, the Russian Empire ceased to exist. The Tsar abdicated the throne, and a year later his entire family was shot in the basement of the Ipatiev house. The 300-year-old Romanov dynasty ended because of one man's stubbornness. 1812. Napoleon Bonaparte, master of Europe, an unbeatable military genius. He controls territory from Spain to Poland, and he decides, you know what? I'm going to conquer Russia. With an army of 600,000 men, he crosses the border. The plan is simple: quickly defeat the Russian army, take Moscow, and dictate the terms of peace. But the Russians employ a scorched earth tactic. Retreating and luring the French deeper into the country, Napoleon takes Moscow. But the city has been set on fire and abandoned. There was no food. Winter was approaching. Supplies were stretched over thousands of kilometers. The result? Of the 600,000 men, fewer than 100,000 returned. Napoleon lost his invincible army. 2 years later, he abdicated the throne. All because of one disastrous campaign. Key phrase: the lesson of history. Russia is invincible in winter. But every 130 years, a genius comes along who decides to test this. 1938. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain meets with Hitler in Munich. Hitler demands that part of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, be handed over to him. Czechoslovakia is an ally of Britain and France. It has a modern army and fortifications, but Chamberlain decides, let him have it, as long as there is no war. He returns to London, waves the treaty, and says, I have brought peace to our time. What happened next? 6 months later, Hitler took over all of Czechoslovakia. Another 6 months later, he attacked Poland. World War II started. The result? 85 million dead. The policy of appeasement showed Hitler that the West was weak. Instead of stopping the dictator when it was still possible, Chamberlain gave him a year to prepare for war. Now his name is synonymous with cowardice and short-sightedness in politics. August 9th, 378 AD. Roman Emperor Valens stands at the head of his army facing the Gothic refugees. His advisors beg him to wait for reinforcements from his nephew, Emperor Gratian. But Valens fears that Gratian will take all the glory of victory. The Romans underestimated the number of Goths. Valens thought there were 10,000 of them, but in fact there were more than 20,000. And the Gothic cavalry suddenly struck the flank. The result? Two-thirds of the Roman army was destroyed. Emperor Valens himself died on the battlefield. It was Rome's greatest military disaster in centuries. The Battle of Adrianople opened the way for the barbarians to invade the empire and marked the beginning of the end of the Western Roman Empire. All because the emperor was jealous of his nephew's glory. 1218. Genghis Khan sends a trade caravan to the Khwarezm Empire with words of peace and friendship. This is a chance to establish profitable relations with the greatest conqueror of the time. What does Shah Muhammad do? He orders the execution of all members of the caravan and sends their heads back. When Genghis Khan sends envoys demanding an explanation, the Shah kills the chief envoy and shaves the beards of the rest. The worst possible insult, Genghis Khan was furious. He gathered an army of 200,000 and descended on Khwarezm like a natural disaster. The result? The Khwarezm Empire was completely destroyed in 2 years. The great cities of Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench were wiped off the face of the earth. Millions died. Irrigation systems were destroyed, and the region has not yet recovered. One of the richest countries in the world turned into a scorched desert. And all because of the pride of one man who decided to humiliate Genghis Khan's envoys. 890. The young Kaiser Wilhelm II ascends to the throne of the German Empire. The country is thriving thanks to the brilliant diplomacy of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who created a system of alliances that isolated France. But the young emperor does not like being lectured by the old man. Wilhelm wants glory and greatness. He dismisses Bismarck and begins to pursue an aggressive foreign policy. He builds a huge fleet, challenging Britain, spoils relations with Russia, and behaves like a bully on the international stage. Bismarck warned, 20 years after my departure, everything will collapse. He was only 4 years wrong. The result? Russia and France formed an alliance. Britain joined them. Germany found itself surrounded. In 1914, World War I began. Germany lost, the empire collapsed, and the Kaiser fled to Holland. 20 million people died. And all because a self-confident emperor dismissed the only person who knew how to keep the peace. 1519. The Aztec Emperor Montezuma II receives reports of strange bearded men who have arrived on huge houses on water. According to legend, the god Quetzalcoatl is supposed to return this very year. And what does Montezuma do? Instead of destroying the tiny detachment of 500 Spaniards, he invites them to the capital as guests of honor. He gives them gold and shows them all the treasures of the empire. Cortés cannot believe his luck. Montezuma's advisors beg him to kill the invaders. But the emperor is paralyzed by superstition and indecision. When he finally realizes his mistake, it is too late. The Spaniards have already formed alliances with tribes hostile to the Aztecs. The result? The Aztec Empire, which controlled 15 million people, fell to a handful of conquistadors. Tenochtitlan was destroyed. Civilization was wiped out. Millions died from disease and slaughter. All because the emperor mistook the brutal conquerors for gods and rolled out the red carpet for them right into the heart of his empire. 12th century, Japan. Emperor Toba rules the country, but is tired of constant intrigue. He decides to hire the Taira samurai clan as his personal bodyguards and military force convenient. Let them fight while he enjoys life. The problem? The leader of the Taira clan, Kiyomori, turns out to be ambitious. Very ambitious. Having gained military power, he quickly realizes that the emperor is just a puppet, a ceremonial figure. The Taira began marrying their daughters into the imperial family, occupying all key positions and controlling trade. In fact, the emperors became prisoners of the samurai. The result? The beginning of the feudal era in Japan, which lasted 700 years. The emperors became powerless symbols, and real power passed to the samurai, the shoguns. This system lasted until 1868. Emperor Toba wanted an easy life, but instead, his dynasty lost power for 7 centuries. One of the longest-lasting political failures in history. 10 rulers. 10 disastrous decisions. Millions of deaths. Empires collapsed. The course of history changed. What do they have in common? Pride, indecision. Ignoring advice. Belief in their own infallibility. History is merciless to fools on thrones. It doesn't matter how many soldiers, gold, or titles you have. One wrong decision, and your name will forever go down in history books as an example of blatant incompetence. What historical decision do you consider the most foolish? Write in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, and remember, it's better to learn from other people's mistakes, especially if those mistakes cost empires. See you in the next episode.